In 1977, a senator held up a document in front of a packed hearing room and said something that stunned the entire country. He said the United States government had been secretly running experiments on its own citizens, without their knowledge, without their consent, for over 20 years. And the most disturbing part? Almost all the evidence had already been destroyed. What was left behind was enough to change history, and what it revealed was one of the darkest programs ever run by an American government agency. This is the story of MKUltra. Let's go back to the early 1950s. The Cold War is in full swing. The United States and the Soviet Union are locked in a silent war, not just for land or weapons, but for something far more unsettling: the human mind. American intelligence officials were genuinely terrified. They had watched as American prisoners of war during the Korean War appeared to make confessions on camera. Confessions that seemed rehearsed, almost robotic. There were reports that the Soviets and Chinese had developed techniques to control human behavior, to break someone down completely, to make them say or do whatever they were told. Whether those fears were entirely accurate is still debated by historians, but the CIA believed them, and that belief was enough. In April 1953, CIA Director Allen Dulles officially authorized a program. It was given a code name, MKUltra. The goal was to develop the CIA's own methods of mind control, to create tools for interrogation, to find ways to make people talk, to disorient enemies, to potentially program human behavior, and they were willing to go far, further than almost anyone realized at the time. The program was led by a chemist named Sidney Gottlieb. He was the man at the center of it all. Under his direction, MKUltra grew into something massive, eventually involving over 150 separate research projects conducted at more than 80 institutions across the United States and Canada. That list included universities, hospitals, prisons, mental health facilities, and private research organizations. Many of these institutions had no idea they were working for the CIA. The agency funneled money through front organizations and foundations to hide where the funding actually came from. Researchers at respected academic institutions were unknowingly participating in a covert government program, and the people being experimented on? Most of them had no idea either. Now here's where things get deeply disturbing. The CIA's primary tool of choice was LSD, lysergic acid diethylamide, a powerful hallucinogenic drug that had only been discovered in 1943. At the time, researchers were genuinely curious about its effects. Some thought it might have therapeutic uses. The CIA saw something else, a potential key to unlocking or destroying the human mind. They gave LSD to mental patients, to prisoners, to drug addicts, to people who checked into hospitals seeking treatment for unrelated problems. They gave it to people in hospitals under the guise of other procedures, without ever telling them what they were actually receiving. Some subjects were given LSD repeatedly, over days or even weeks. Researchers watched what happened. They documented the psychological breaks, the terror, the confusion, and it didn't stop at LSD. MKUltra researchers also experimented with mescaline, heroin, barbiturates, methamphetamine, and other substances. They studied the effects of electroconvulsive therapy, electric shocks to the brain. They explored the use of hypnosis to implant false memories or suppress real ones. They tested sensory deprivation, locking people in darkness and silence for extended periods of time to see how long it took before the mind began to fracture. There is documented evidence of psychological abuse. There is documented evidence of physical abuse in certain cases. And in some documented cases, particularly involving women at certain institutions, there is evidence of sexual abuse connected to the experiments. These were not abstract research notes. These were real people, and most of them never knew what had been done to them. One of the most documented and most disturbing cases is that of Frank Olson. Frank Olson was a U.S. Army biochemist who worked with the CIA. In November of 1953, he attended a work retreat at a cabin in Maryland. During that retreat, according to later official investigations, Sidney Gottlieb secretly dosed the drinks of several attendees with LSD without telling them. Olson had a severe psychological reaction. He became withdrawn, anxious, and deeply distressed. He told colleagues he wanted to leave his job. A few days later, Frank Olson fell from a window on the 13th floor of a New York hotel. He was dead at 43. His death was ruled a suicide at the time. His family was told he had simply fallen. The truth, that he had been secretly given LSD days before his death, was hidden from his family for over 2 decades. When the MKUltra story eventually broke in the mid-1970s, his family finally learned what had happened. They exhumed his body in 1994 and conducted a second autopsy. The forensic pathologist who performed it concluded that the evidence was more consistent with a homicide than a suicide. That conclusion has never been officially accepted, and the full truth of what happened to Frank Olson remains disputed to this day. One of the most extensive and internationally significant the cases within MKUltra took place in Canada, at McGill University in Montreal. A psychiatrist named Dr. Ewen ran a research program there under CIA funding, again, with the money hidden through front organizations. Cameron believed he could effectively erase a person's existing mental patterns and rebuild them from scratch. He called this process psychic driving. What he actually did was keep patients in drug-induced sleep for weeks or even months at a time. He subjected them to prolonged sensory deprivation. He played recorded messages on repeat, hundreds of thousands of times, to implant new thoughts. He used heavy electroconvulsive therapy far beyond accepted medical standards. Many of his patients were admitted seeking help for relatively minor conditions, anxiety, depression. What they experienced instead caused lasting permanent damage. Some lost significant portions of their memory. Some were left unable to care for themselves. These patients had no idea they were part of a CIA-funded experiment. Their government, and in the case of the Canadian patients, a foreign government, had used them without their knowledge or consent. So how did all of this stay secret for so long? Part of the answer is simple. The CIA was very good at keeping secrets, but there was also something more deliberate at work. In 1973, as the Watergate scandal was consuming Washington and congressional scrutiny of the intelligence community was intensifying, CIA Director Richard Helms ordered the destruction of MKUltra files. A massive number of documents were shredded. The program might have remained almost entirely hidden, except for one mistake. Some documents had been misfiled in a financial records building that was not included in the destruction order. Those files survived. In 1975, a congressional committee known as the Church Committee began investigating abuses within the U.S. intelligence community. MKUltra came up, but without the destroyed files, the picture was incomplete. Then, in 1977, a Freedom of Information Act request unearthed roughly 20,000 documents that had survived the purge. The Senate held new hearings. The scope of the program became undeniable. Former CIA Director Stansfield Turner testified before Congress. He confirmed the basic outlines of the program, the secret experiments, the lack of consent, the use of American and Canadian citizens as unknowing test subjects. What was officially confirmed? The CIA had run a program lasting roughly 2 decades in which people were given mind-altering substances without consent. They were subjected to psychological and sometimes physical abuse. Front organizations were used to hide the CIA's involvement, and when the program was finally in danger of being exposed, evidence was deliberately destroyed. President Ford's administration reached settlements with some of the families of known victims, including the Olson family. The Canadian government eventually compensated some of the victims of Dr. Ewen Cameron's experiments after the CIA's involvement was confirmed. MKUltra officially ended in 1973, but its shadow is long. The experiments produced no reliable method of mind control. Most researchers who have reviewed the surviving documents conclude the program largely failed to achieve its stated goals. What it did produce was suffering. Real suffering inflicted on real people by their own government. The legacy of MKUltra lives in the ethics rules that now govern scientific research. The requirement that research subjects must give informed consent, that they must know what is being done to them, and must agree to it freely, became far more strictly enforced in the aftermath of these revelations. It also left something else behind, a documented record that governments, even democratic ones, are capable of treating their own citizens as expendable, as raw material to be used and discarded in the name of national security. The files that were destroyed can never be recovered. The full scope of what was done during those 20 years will likely never be known. What we do know is disturbing enough. And the people who were experimented on, the ones who never knew, who spent years not understanding why they were damaged, why their memories were gone, why they couldn't function the way they once had. Most of them never got a real explanation. Some never got anything at all. Thanks for watching.